Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is episode 5 of This Is Who We Are. My name is Steve Greenfield, and I thank you for joining. If you're here for the first time, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, join the Facebook page. If you like what you're hearing and find it refreshing and different, which I hope that you will, please share it on your own social media. And if you happen to live in the broadcast radius of a Pacifica Network affiliate station, I actually started this content with them in mind at their request. So please contact your local Pacifica station. Let them know that this program is available in an audio format on their AudioPort website, and that you'd appreciate it if they put it up on the air and give it a shot to reach that radio audience. Thank you about that as well. This has really been an eventful 2 or 3 days leading up to this week's episode, pertaining very specifically to where I left off last week, where I was arriving at the critical element, really the driving issue of everything that I'm talking about here, everything that I think that we need to recognize and undo. And of course, we can't undo it until we recognize that it's happening. And that is our political mythology, and why it's created, the function of it, and to a very large extent, how it's created more to seek profit for the people who create it than to serve any particular national purpose that could be seen as all-encompassing and across the board. It is audience-targeted mythology, and like all mythology since the beginning of time, it is very specifically designed. The narrative is told to have a particular effect on its audience and to cause us to behave in ways that are inspired by and fulfill the wishes of the people who create that mythological narrative. This has really been the very essence of civilization since its founding, right? Since we came out of our hunter-gatherer stage and started establishing civilization, the very first thing that we had to do to maintain our cohesion was come up with a set of origin stories. How did we get here? Why is it proper that we are here at this place? What constitutes the things that we share as people, that we recognize, that bind us together, and because of that, we will then work together, that we will consider ourselves one people with common goals and a common history, common leadership, not like those other people over there. They have a different origin and a different reason why they are where they live. We have to defend our area and our way of life from them. And, what that comes down to at that point of origin, and then continuously throughout history moving on from there, is that we have to have a way to know that we are us, and not some other people. Because if we don't identify as us and somebody else as the other or not us, then the people that are leading us don't really have a basis by which they can call us together to do the things that we uniquely do among the species of the world, which is to act together in concert in large numbers, and also to act in a way that's adaptable to changing situations. There are other animals that work in concert, right? Ant colonies, beehives, etc. But they have a specific genetic programming. There's nothing adaptable about it. Their instincts don't change. And if something in their surroundings or in their circumstances change, they will, either have to fly off and go somewhere else or just die in place where they are. What really makes human beings unique in the species of the entire world, and has led to us changing from hunter-gatherers like any other animals, any other primates, is that we have this unique twin ability to both act in concert and to adapt as conditions change. This has allowed us to be an invasive species, right? Travel all over the world. All kinds of things that it's enabled us to do that's resulted in this entire constructed environment in which we now live, that at this point, culturally has completely replaced the natural environment and is well on its way, as I hope that we're all aware at this point, to actually completely replacing the natural environment, not just culturally, but even physically, because of the amount of harm that the operation of our constructed environments and our cultural norms, the impact that that's had on our own biosphere, on our own natural environment. So, what does that have to do with the current events of this moment that I mentioned when we started? The two that I'm thinking about in particular, both national headlines right now, both very important as national headlines, and very important how we react to the reason why they are national headlines. One of them just happened today with the death of Rush Limbaugh, probably the most successful creator and purveyor of political and cultural mythology for profit over the last 35 years, certainly the most impactful on our political and social systems. Certainly made a tremendous amount of money for himself in so doing, and really molded and recreated the way that our political dynamic happens in this country. Certainly, many other people have followed in his footsteps, stood on his shoulders, operated through the platforms he created. But Rush Limbaugh really was very much an originator of this modern era of polarization. And the validation that polarization is what we desire, as a people, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, in ways that harken back, to 1854, as we broke down into the onset of the age of the Civil War, when we actually did separate and kill each other over that. The other one, which I think is equally important because it speaks to the other half of this constructed social and political cultural divide that we have right now, is the revelation very clearly, unequivocally, that Andrew Cuomo, governor of my own state of New York, widely hailed by the other side of that divide as the supreme example of leadership during a crisis. So much so that the television industry gave him a special Emmy Award for his press conferences. So much so that he got a huge advance on a book deal to publish a book and market that book, even on his program as governor of New York, about how leadership in a crisis operates, why he's successful, why following the science is the only acceptable model, and the proof positive that it works in how he's been operating here in New York. That has now been revealed to the entirety of the United States of America to have always been a fraud, to have been built on entirely manufactured information, the receipt of that information and the welcoming of it as accurate information predicated on nothing but the installed trust of its intended audience on Andrew Cuomo as a source of that information, right? And on people like Andrew Cuomo as a source of that information, much the same as people on the other side of the divide have long since come to accept Rush Limbaugh and all of his knockoffs and people that built on his program over the years as sources of information that they trust. Now, the fascinating thing about this dynamic, what really gives it legs, what makes it seemingly impossible to undo, is that so much of the time, the people that are speaking on the respective sides of this immutable, seemingly immutable divide, when they're speaking about the people on the other side, in those instances, they are oftentimes telling the truth. When people on the right were saying that Andrew Cuomo is the person of an authoritarian nature and the person that is causing a lot of COVID deaths by the way that he's handling that crisis in New York, and that he is being deceptive and presenting false information to the public. They were telling the truth when they said that. That is the basis. That is the hook by which they get people to listen to the falsehoods that they then tell. That is how they establish that trust, because that part of what they're saying, that's the buy-in. That part of it is true. Now let's go back and look on the other side of the coin. Most people on the, let's call it the Andrew Cuomo side of the divide, have strong reason to believe that Rush Limbaugh has been a singular force in the promulgation of hate in this country. He has never been abashed in any way. I should say had never been abashed in any way. In fact, the whole basis of his presentation was that he was mocking and hateful towards entire groups of people, right? They weren't feminists, they were feminazis. He would keep a mocking tally of people who were dying of AIDS as proof that being homosexual was inherently bad and to be repressed, right? His calling card was his bigotry and his unique mocking style in how he expressed it, right? And so it was always very easy for people on the other side of the cultural divide to just say, well, that person, he's full of conspiracies. That person is telling you things that are untrue. That person is telling you that you have to choose between the value of black lives and the value of police lives, and that the two don't go together. That's manufactured. That's not true. He doesn't want you to believe that climate change is happening. He's actually told a preposterous tale that we only perceive that it's different because we have more air conditioning now. As you know, and people would believe. So he would say things that were demonstrably false, that people could see and be shown was demonstrably false. And so again, that was the hook. That was the hook, the very accurate hook that won the trust of people who were on the other side of the divide from Rush Limbaugh and the people like him, to bring people in and say, oh, well, look, that's true. I can see that that's true. Here's an honest source. Here's somebody that I can trust to give me my information. And so you ended up, and it built and it built and it built over the years. After Rush Limbaugh had been successful for a while, one of his mentors, Roger Ailes, became the news director for the new Fox News network. MSNBC was to follow once it was established that Fox News had managed to attract the entire audience of people who perceived themselves as having a unified political perspective. Then there was no reason for stations like CNN and the traditional networks to remain attempting to get the entire spectrum of the audience, and they too retracted to the aiming for half the audience model. And so we ended up now with this entrenched system that's 25 years old at this point. An entire generation of Americans, who watched Walter Cronkite has died off during that 25 years. An entire generation of voting-aged people have grown up without ever seeing public information presented in any other way, but in this powerfully hostile partisan divide that is established on the half-truth that other people are lying, and then the even larger half-truth that we are then telling you the truth. And so that's the situation that we're in right now. The death of Rush Limbaugh and the exposure of Andrew Cuomo's fraud laying out to us in the starkest terms possible this week. The thing that I was wrapping up with at the end of the last episode, which is mythology. Why is mythology created? Why is it so readily accepted? What purpose does it serve? And in light of what we're talking about right now in terms of these current events, besides the political purpose, besides the moving populations to act in concert in the belief that they share a common truth and a common history and a common ideology that is somehow intrinsically good as people, and that anybody who doesn't share that with them is intrinsically bad, or at least hostile to them as people and not able to peacefully coexist with them. In our way of life, in our form of economy, the biggest force driving that, like Dr. Seuss taught us over 50 years ago in his story about the Sneetches, and how this Monkey McBean character was rocking them back and forth and taking their money day after day, putting stars on their bellies and then erasing them back off again, counting his money away every time that he walked away from them as the hostilities were renewed, is that this is how it operates here in America. Rush Limbaugh was doing what he was doing to make money. He was making $20 million a year. He was building, publishing empires on the basis of it. Andrew Cuomo is governor of New York. He's in his third term. He'd like to be president. When he published his book, when he got his Emmy, people were saying that Joe Biden should step aside and not even complete the presidential election and allow the convention to replace him with Andrew Cuomo on the grounds that this would create an overwhelming victory for the Democratic Party. So these divides, these sales pitches, these mythologies that people build are a for-profit industry in this country. Okay, we live under capitalism. Anything that can be made and distributed sold for more money than it costs to make and distribute it is going to be made and distributed. I mean, that's what we've been raised to believe is the power of the economic system, and that freedom to just respond to the market, to seek out the market and respond to the market without planning or interference somehow works in everybody's best interest. And so we end up with a system where we fail to recognize, for a variety of reasons, but we fail to recognize, or we deliberately look away from that singular reality, which is at the literal and figurative bottom line of all of it, which is that we are going to make and distribute anything that can be sold for more money than it costs to make and distribute it. Okay, just past the quarter hour mark now. I want to remind everybody you are here for episode 5 of This Is Who We Are. My name is Steve Greenfield. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. We wrapped up, we were talking about the mythology under which we live. This, of course, is nothing new, right? We all have Bibles, origin stories, right? The human species came out of our hunter-gatherer stage. We discovered that we could thrive better if we acted in teams, if we acted in concert, if we took the direction of leaders so that we as a large group of people could be swiftly adaptable to changing conditions. Did we move to a temperate environment? Did a flood just happen? Did an enemy just attack us? Whatever did a disease just hit us, right? Whatever the thing may be, to have that agility. And so we created origin stories. We needed to know why this piece of land is our piece of land. This belief system is our belief system. This way that we create our leadership and agree to follow it is our system. In the Western Bible, in the Old Testament, it is laced throughout, in the subsequent prophecies with the dire consequences of, taking on a neighboring tribe's belief systems, language, that your civilization would cease to exist. And of course, it was written in that book in terms of punishment, right? The rains will dry up, your enemies will vanquish you, whatever, the whole bit, right? But literally what was being said was that this is our culture. And if we adopt someone else's culture, if we fall too much under the influence of their culture, then we will be them. We will no longer be us. We will have been absorbed into them, and we will no longer be us, right? So everything, the entirety of civilization from, 7,000 years ago when the first seeds were planted and stationary permanent homes were built in proximity to where the seeds were being planted, to everything that we have now with skyscrapers and industry and space travel and the internet, is all a product of that transition from hunter-gatherer, the recognition that we could be more productive, more adaptable, and more survivable by working in concert under leadership, and the discovery as that was developing that we would be convincible to work in concert if we had been convinced that we are the same and that somebody else is the somebody else, right? So it functions the exact same way today, whether it is the story of how Abraham was led to the land of Canaan after smashing his father's idols and because he discovered that monotheism was the truth, to George Washington cutting down the tree and then admitting to his father that he did it, which is totally false. Just as in more modern times that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, turned out to be completely false. But all across the political spectrum, our trusted leaders told us that it was likely enough to be true that we needed to kill 500,000 people just in case. And we all agreed that we would do that. And even after we found out that it had been untrue, we had no problem, advancing the careers and electing and nominating for president all the people who had lied to us about that and voted to kill that 500,000 people. This is also the answer, to the ever popular question, why does it appear that people are voting against their own interests? And so this really gives an answer, no matter which side of the divide you're on, it's the same exact answer. It's because we don't perceive it as against our own interests. The respective sides perceive what they're doing as in their own interest. If it doesn't appear to be in their individual economic interest, that doesn't mean that it's not in their interest, because they may see themselves as part of a larger collective, part of an us. And there are some things that are important to us that have greater importance in life and what we're going to leave behind to our children than how much money I'm making or, how good my health insurance program is. You have heard people say, I would rather die of an illness than be kept alive by socialized medicine, because the threat that represents over time is so great that my immediate personal needs are puny in comparison to the magnitude of the need to keep that from happening over the long run, right? You hear people say that. When they say that, they haven't been, tricked into something. They genuinely believe that. The same way that people on the other side of the divide, believe that Obamacare was a major advance, as flawed as it was, that it was still a major advance from where we were at the time that it was adopted, when in reality, multiple studies by top medical investigators and economic investigators, people at Yale University, people at medical journals, have determined that when Obamacare was started, we were losing 45,000 Americans a year to inadequate medical insurance, and that after Obamacare had been operating for 10 years, that number had increased by more than 50% to 68,000 per year, up from 45. That yes, we can tell individual anecdotes, and that's the mythology, right? That's creating a mythology to bond people together as a tribe. That you put people on the microphone at a political convention to talk about how their personal family was saved by Obamacare, right? And so we never check and find out that that's just one person out of an extra 23,000 per year that are dying now more than were dying when Obamacare started. And of course, they can't be brought to the microphone to explain their situation because they're dead. Surely we can see that invading Iraq was not in any of our interests, right? It's cost several $1 trillion. It's killed far more Americans than 9/11 caused. And Iraq, of course, was not connected to 9/11 in any way, but that mythology was promoted at the time by both Joe Biden and by George Bush and by Hillary Clinton and everybody on both sides of the aisle, that there was some kind of connection between Saddam Hussein and the events of 9/11. So we've blown several $1 trillion that we sure wish we'd had back now for economic stimulus and healthcare and, little things like that are affecting, several 100 million Americans right now. And we don't really have the money anymore to pay for it. And yet we're not even leaving Iraq, right? We're not even pressuring our elected officials. Let's stop that hemorrhaging. Let's leave Iraq. Let's leave Iraq to the Iraqis. Let's leave Afghanistan to the Afghanis. Let's leave Libya to the Libyans. Surely we all voted against our own interest when we voted to elect people to office that had done that to us with their decision-making authority in the positions that they held. Nobody is immune from, and so there'll be people on all sides of the political spectrum looking at the other sides and coming to the exact same question. Why are these people voting against their own interests? How did these people come to believe that socialized health insurance would actually be good for them? Don't they understand, the terrible problems of socialism? So there's something we actually somehow all agree on, which is that everybody but our tribe is voting against their own interests. So clearly, there's something wrong about the way that we're conceiving of that question. If everybody's asking the same question about each other, then that means there's another question that needs to be asked, which is, what do we think are our own interests, and how did we come to think that? Are we really being rational actors? Are we doing what capitalism says we should do, maximizing our own self-interest? Are we voting for what really does the most for our families? Are we repeatedly voting for things to continue that we already know are hurting our own families, our own communities, our own, however large you want to expand those circles of how you view the people that you care about? And so I'm going to get back to the premise of this program, and something that's gotten lost, and something that when you talk about, you just can't talk about it for profit, because that's not going to sell Chevrolets. This isn't going to sell. You have to hold your audience, and to hold an audience, you have to give them something that they feel loyal to, right? So you're going to be validating their feeling of tribal bonding. And that's how you're going to build the really large-scale audiences that advertisers are going to come looking for to support. Because, Rush Limbaugh didn't sell tickets. Rush Limbaugh isn't, Bruce Springsteen, who makes most of his money because 20,000 people a night will spend $160 to come see one of his shows. Nobody paid to watch Rush Limbaugh. Commercial interests, corporations that advertise products, paid to put him in our living rooms for free. Donors, think tanks, PACs, everybody under the sun donates money to candidates so that we can hear them for free. The Presidential Debate Commission decides only these two candidates are going to be on television. You're going to see them for free. Anybody else who wants to reach you, they're going to have to find a way, like Ross Perot, to come up with many, many millions of dollars, buy a half an hour of time, stand there with his flip chart, kind of like what I'm doing right now, even though my flip chart is off camera, and talking to you and being easy to paint as an outsider or even a nut. Because if we weren't nuts, then the large-scale commercial interests would be bringing us to you for free. That's how you know that we're marginal thinkers and not worth talking to and considering the information that we're bringing to you. And so it gets back to really the mission that I had in creating this show, is that there's nothing natural about the people of the United States only caring about half the people of the United States and considering the other half to be an enemy. Now, if you've been with the show since the beginning, then you know that the premise that I'm working with is that this didn't develop from Rush Limbaugh and Rachel Maddow and corporations that funnel money to them to bring them to us for free, to influence us into thinking that that's how we have to be, one or the other. We were actually founded this way at our outset. It's written in our Constitution that we are two separate countries, two separate value systems, two separate economic systems that are grafted around a free trade and a mutual defense pact, and built into the Constitution is the absolute impossibility of any of that being voted out by democratic means. This thing we supposedly believe in most, which is one person, one vote. We designed our Constitution to make sure that this bifurcated nature of two countries grafted around free trade and mutual defense could never be ended by vote, right? That's the 3/5 compromise. That's the 2-seat Senate. That's the Electoral College. That was built into it and made inviolable. In fact, the 2-seat Senate is the only part of the Constitution. Hardly anyone knows this. It certainly wasn't taught to us in our history and civics classes when we were in school. The 2-seat Senate, the 2-seat per state Senate, cannot be changed by amendment. We were taught anything could be changed by amendment, but the 2-seat Senate that makes a much greater voting strength to lower population states at the federal level is something we'd have to actually end the Constitution and start it over from scratch if we wanted to do that. So this is how our nation was born. This is what we wrote into the system. This has been why we've had so much political violence in an attempt to solve things that we were prevented from solving democratically. And this is why that political violence, basically drawn along the same lines, now we just call it red and blue instead of north and south, is continuing to this day. So with that, we're approaching the second quarter hour mark, and I want to remind everybody, you are watching or listening to This Is Who We Are, a new political commentary program that is hoping to not bridge the partisan divide, because that's a fool's errand. I am seeking to tear it down, and not to tear it down in its entirety, but to tear it down brick by brick in a manageable system by bringing to our attention the things that we do agree on, rather than saying, here's my entire 28-point package, and if you agree with all of it, you can be in my club, and if you disagree with even one thing of it, you have to be in somebody else's club. That's not the way to tear it down. Those fortifications are built high and strong, and like any strong fortification, you have to break it down brick by brick. And I believe that the first step in making this happen is to bring people's attention to something I genuinely believe we all know, which is that a very small number of people are making an enormous amount of money, achieving an enormous amount of power, and causing an enormous amount of violence throughout the world on scales that, are on par with World War II scale destruction. Millions of people at a time throughout the world, generating hostilities, making the military budget a self-fulfilling prophecy, everything else that's involved. It's surely one thing we all know is that a very small number of people are doing it for a great deal of money and power. Ownership of the majority of the property that could be available on the market for us to acquire and leave to our own descendants is becoming further and further concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. Corporate stock is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, so the value of shareholder voting is going down. We know this. For some reason, we are so caught up in the other half of America is our enemy, and that we need to trust these leaders and promote them to power because they'll protect us from the devastation of the other side being in power. That's come to be really, that's so reductionist. That's all we all care about right now, that we that's blinders that we're wearing to something we already know, that we can look around, turn our heads, use our peripheral vision, and see that, Fox News is a corporation owned by a billionaire who's not American. How did we lapse into taking direction and thinking that the American way of life, of a working class, of blue-collar people who drive a truck for a living, people who repair HVAC systems for a living, people who build homes for a living, that somehow the person who gives them their political and even their religious and spiritual frameworks are people who have nothing in common with them, who have never lived a day of their lives in the kind of economic conditions that they live in the kind of neighborhoods that they live in. A preacher who preaches in a stadium and flies a private jet, boy, he's not living your life, I'm not sure he's the person that you should be looking to for how a person who believed in humility and helping the poor, and that the rich and powerful were conspiring to destroy the nation of his time, how you look to those very, analogs of Pharisees and collaborators with Mammon in our day to be a religious leader. See, this is what's happened to us. I don't want to lump all of this onto what people perceive as the right-wing side, because as I said with Andrew Cuomo and Rachel Maddow, we have the exact same thing. I mean, Cuomo's making a couple of $1 million off that book. He's selling it to liberals, okay? And it's all lies. Every page of it is a lie. And he's getting rich because we're buying his book because we think it's true. So, yeah, I don't want to ever lapse in while I'm doing this program to say, look, my side is against everyone whose lives are not benefiting from those powerful people manipulating our thought processes. Okay, that's my side, and I think everybody who's not extremely wealthy and not part of these vast power structures and cogs in the wheels of these vast power structures looking for recognition and promotion within those vast power structures and the myriad manifestations of power structures in this country. If you're not inside that system and looking to advance yourself inside that system, then those are the others. Those are the only others in your life. We know this in many ways in our ordinary operations, right? If you're a liberal, when those blue collar white guys, jump out of their fire truck and approach your overturned car and start cutting the doors off it, you don't tell them, go away, you're dangerous. Those are your favorite people in the world. At that moment, if you gave yourself a chance, you'd, like I do, and I've mentioned maybe only in the first episode that I am a rural volunteer firefighter. I do not live in any kind of bubble. I do not want to live in any kind of bubble because that would just be boring. Boy, a world of people that are pretty much mostly just like me. Why have any community at all? I could just stay home and be me. So those, this in these moments, right? That when you call 911, that it's not the Rainbow Coalition coming to your house. That, but you call 911 anyway because they're good at what they do. They are your community-wide system for providing that service, and you appreciate it. They are wonderful people. They are risking their lives to save you, save your family, save your property. Every once in a while, as we see in the news, one or more of them get seriously injured. I should say one or more of us. Again, this is me. This is my own life. I went out on the icy roads at 3 o'clock in the morning just 2 nights ago for a house fire with a bunch of fantastic people. Every once in a while, one of them pays that ultimate price. They paid that ultimate price for you. How could they be deplorable? The most you can say is that there are some things about what you perceive as their outlook on life and other people and things that don't conform to your own outlook. But somewhere, again, in the back of your heads, the same way that you don't have anything in common with the owners of this system, the power brokers and salesmen of this system, that that you have nothing in common with them. By the same token, there are moments when that you have everything in common with the people that your own power leaders are telling you are your enemy. You know it. And you also know that it stands to reason that if you knew more about them than just when they come to your house in their fire truck, that you would also know more things about them that you would genuinely like and appreciate. And you would start to dislike and unappreciate all the people that are telling you that those people are your enemy in general, not just someone who disagrees with you or acts in ways that you find unpleasant in certain elements of their life, but that person is actually a foot soldier in a substantial, organized enemy movement that's hostile to your own survival. Do you understand that that's what your leaders are telling you? Do you understand that 90% of what they tell you to get you to believe that is made up? Okay? It's as made up as believing that the Red Sea physically parted was a factual event rather than accepting it as an allegory for what it was, of a people who were subsumed within another power structure, leaving that and starting their own way of life. But if you actually believe that the Red Sea, and especially if you believe that the Red Sea parted, because that's not even what the Bible says. That's a mistranslation. The Bible says it was the Sea of Reeds. And yet somehow through repetition of the King James translation from the 1500s to the present day, do you believe that the takeaway from the incident is that the Red Sea physically parted, that the Israelites crossed to the other side, that the Egyptian army went to follow them, and as soon as the entirety of the Egyptian army was inside the confines of the Red Sea, that the waters were released and fell down upon them and drowned all of them. Right? Okay. That is a myth. That is a myth designed to create a sense of national identity and unity and a sense of purpose among a group of people. We like to believe that in modern times, and I would like to believe that even in ancient times, because clearly at the time that those events were purported to happen, the people who were alive in that time were aware that that didn't literally happen. They were aware that they were trying to create stories like George Washington chopping down the tree, like Abe Lincoln doing his homework with a burnt stick on the back of a shovel. All of these things, that they knew that they were writing for the purpose and to their way of thinking, and possibly, truly at that time, to make the people productive and to keep the people safe from other neighboring groups of people that were already, coalescing around a mythology and acting in concert, and could therefore potentially have greater strength and be threatening to that group. I'm not criticizing how this process began. It was the way that we came out of the jungles and created the civilization that's been evolving ever since, and making it possible for people to walk on the moon. These unimaginable accomplishments. So I'm not putting down the process per se, but I am putting down the process of taking these stories as literally true, because in our own time the same thing happens, right? Dan Rather back in the 1980s was dressing like a member of the Taliban, if you recall, if you're old enough, laying on the side of a hill in Afghanistan and telling us that these people that we now call the Taliban were the George Washingtons of their country, the new George Washingtons, and that we must support them and fund them and bring them weapons and smuggle them in from Pakistan into Afghanistan, because they are the heroes fighting against Soviet domination and for the independence of their country from a foreign empire, just as our own Minutemen were fighting against impossible odds and were able to achieve it because of the support of France and outside power that helped them do that, and that we need to play the role of France on behalf of these religious soldiers, and help them defeat this evil empire. And he dressed in their clothing, and he was flown to their hillsides to broadcast to us live about this. And then fast forward, another 15 years to 2001, and he's sitting there on television saying to George Bush, "Okay, tell me what to do that I can be of assistance in destroying the Taliban." And so there was a myth that was built, and then as quickly and by the same mechanisms as which it was built, and by the same physical person who built it, Dan Rather, CBS News, built a myth that the Taliban were the new George Washingtons and the equivalent of our own colonial origins and revolution, and that we play the role of France and support them. And 15 years later, he was turning to another president and saying, "Tell me what I can do to propagate the belief of our people that we are now going to go kill all of these people and remove them from power and be the foreign empire that destroys their sovereignty." And we very quickly all said, "Yeah, that makes sense. I don't really notice that it's the same guy. I don't really notice he's telling us the exact opposite thing that he told us 15 years ago." Why? Because he was a trusted source. He was trusted when he told us that we need to help the Taliban, and he was trusted when he told us that we had to destroy the Taliban. He was trusted when he told us we had to stop the foreign power from interfering with their sovereignty. He was trusted when he told us that we have to become the foreign power that was interfering with their sovereignty. In both cases, that our national survival was going to depend on us agreeing that this was the story and this was how we were going to act in concert, and that he was getting paid a couple of $1 million a year by CBS News to be the person who told us whatever story he was being paid to tell us, and that we, as the viewers, all we knew is that we considered him a trustworthy source, and we didn't even notice that he was telling us the exact opposite thing that he had just finished telling us. So I'm approaching now the 3/4 mark here in this week's broadcast. So I'm going to remind everybody, you are here, you are watching and listening to This Is Who We Are. It's the 5th episode. My name is Steve Greenfield. I would like to, if you're here new or if you've missed any of the earlier episodes, go on the YouTube channel. This Is Who We Are, hosted by Steve Greenfield. You will find the 4 previous episodes. They're in the same format of what you're seeing right now. I'm sitting here downstairs in front of my piano and just speaking to you colloquially from my own experience, from your knowledge, trying to break down some of these myths so that we can stop standing in each other's way of making the progress we need to make, whether that's health progress, whether that's bringing about peace, and stop hemorrhaging all this money and arousing so much hatred for us around the world through these non-defensive military operations, whether it is about providing economic growth within the context of recognizing the harm that fossil fuel combustion is doing to our whether our children can survive in the habitat that we're leaving behind them. All of this stuff, right? If we can just get away from this sense that the other half of our own population is our enemy and that stopping them from winning an election is more important than stopping the glaciers from melting. We have to stop that. That is the thing that our actual survival as a nation, as a culture, as a pluralistic and diverse culture, where you can go from state to state and hear different music and eat different foods and hear different accents of pronunciation and go to different kinds of concerts and swim in different kinds of lakes and waters. What we would like to believe is the advantage of living in such a vast land, instead of being in one of the smaller land area countries of the world, that we're in, one of the top 4 in land mass. This was supposed to be our strength. All the different kinds of people, the Native American and Hispanic background, Latino people to the Southwest, the people in the Northeast, California, everything that was supposed to be the Gulf of Mexico, right, versus Boston Harbor, the whole beautiful diversity and tapestry of this country that is not available to us and is disappearing before our eyes, and our very biosphere slipping away from us because we have become caught up, as we were in the 1850s, in believing that our survival is more dependent on stopping someone else from getting elected than from paying attention to the science of the glaciers, paying attention to the science of how COVID-19 is spread, paying attention to the science of how wages actually translate into a growing economy and not an inflationary economy, paying attention to those things that we can work on issue by issue for advancement, and leave each other alone about the things that make us different, because there are plenty of things that we like about the things that make us different, as well as the things that we dislike about the things that make us different. And so I'm going to drop this thing about mythology and its purpose and its manifestations. We'll come back to that, just like I did with the history about our violence over several. I'll come back to it in future episodes, but it's really important to me at this point, this late, with 12 minutes to go here in the 5th episode, to get back to something I said in the opening episode, the premise of what's happening here. If I weren't optimistic that we could do this, I would not be doing this. I'd just be watching television right now. I wouldn't be doing this, but I have seen this work in my own life, and not just in the fire department. I was an elected official for 6 years, 2 terms on the school board. School board here in New York, unique among all elections in that it is nonpartisan. And I don't even mean symbolically nonpartisan like states that don't have parties, but everybody's still in a party. I mean, it's actually nonpartisan. when you run for office, you tell people what you know about the operation of public education, and sometimes that and policies that you'd like to see the school district act on, and how you would approach budget and taxation and those kinds of things, right? You don't say vote for me and these four other people, because if those other, it doesn't work that way. And as a result, and I'm telling you this, let this sink in. This is so important. 6 years on the school board here. And I can just say off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you that 95% or more of our votes passed 7-0. 7-0. And on that board, there were Greens, there were Republicans, there were progressive Democrats, there were corporatist Democrats, IBM executives, musicians, truck drivers, you name it. Academics, every kind of person imaginable. And yet 95% or more of the votes that we took passed or failed by 7-0. Okay, and the reason is that because we weren't being loyal to a constructed power system, and responding to mythologies to sustain that system and to maintain divisions in groups of people that would vote according to those mythologized beliefs. We looked at simple things like, is there enough money in the budget for this? This program that we've been running for 3 years, boy, you talk about how government programs never end. That's not true. I'm here to tell you that's not true. They end all the time. I ended several, and so did the 6 other people I was on with at any given moment on that school board. Program's not working. We cancel it. It used to have 40 people a year participating in it. Over the last 5 years, that's dwindled from 10 to 5 to 2. Okay, I guess that extracurricular program is going to be canceled. Sorry, 2 remaining kids, but you can't have a football team with 2 kids. We're going to have to cancel that program. And I'm kidding, it wasn't football, but other things like that, different kinds of games clubs and things like that. And then we would have that budget available for something else where people had been petitioning us. There was clearly a larger number of people interested in doing it. This was the norm. This is how we operated every single week. Every stone got turned over. And nobody was saying, I'm going to vote differently from that person just to prove to my voters that I have a different value system from that person. All of us would have been voted out, no matter what party we're in, no matter what we did with our professional lives. Every one of us would have been voted out if a hint got out to the public that any consideration like that ever came up. And they knew that no consideration like that ever came up because 95% of the votes passed or failed by unanimous vote, right? And of course, it was all televised, right? Every meeting was televised live and put on a web archive for people to watch later. There was public comment before and after every meeting with no time limit. Boy, this was like governmentopia, the school board. And there's over 700 districts in New York that do this every single day. So and that's way more. There's 7 to 9 people in all of those 700 districts. They've got a 100-fold population advantage in elected officialdom over the state assembly and the state senate. They get far more votes in aggregate across the state every year than the entirety of the few hundred people that are in the state assembly and the state senate. And yet none of these horrible culture war divides ever happen in any of the 700 school districts. So I'm telling you, it can be done. It's not just the fire department. Government can run this way. And not just because it's been theoretically demonstrated, but because 700 school districts do this every single day throughout New York State, and probably in your state too, if you're not in New York. A lot of local sovereignty is provided to local school boards, and the elections are elections of individuals running to the entire electorate, not to half of the electorate. And then it operates. It actually operates at the meetings, at the vote level, at the policy adoption and budget adoption level on that basis. So it can be done. So yes, I'm an optimist. And so, the question becomes for many people, how do we do this? How do we start doing this? And I will tell you, you already know how, maybe not in public administration, but you already know how in your private life. We always, people in politics always say, hey, you don't operate your private life. You don't operate your own budget the way the government does. You don't operate your private life. You don't borrow when we do. We borrow to buy a house. We borrow to buy a car. We use our credit cards. So we do. But aside from that, that's kind of one of the themes, right? We don't do this in our private life, so government shouldn't be doing it either. Vote for me and I'll make sure government operates like your private life. And then they go right out and operate government in no way relation to your private life. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean by that. If I want to go bowling and I'm asking around a group of people, hey, who likes to go bowling, right? And maybe I'll get 3 of them and we'll have a foursome and we'll go bowling. I do not ask this large group of people who likes bowling and who likes garage rock music and who likes swimming, who prefers swimming at a beach to swimming at a lake, and who prefers minivans to sports cars, and who prefer, we just ask, hey, do any of you guys like to go bowling? I want to go bowling. Do any of you want to go bowling? We don't throw the whole package of what our entire lives are at them, and then they'll go like, well, I do like bowling, but I don't like any of that other stuff. I'm probably not going to enjoy hanging around with this person. The heck with the bowling. No, not a bowler. You go bowl. We don't do that, right? When we invite someone out, to the movies, we don't make that conditional on whether we think we like country music, as we noticed they were listening to country music on their car radio when we walked up to ask them if they wanted to go to the movies. And we didn't stop before we asked the question, do you want to go to the movies, just because we heard country music coming out of the car. In our real lives, we never do this. We pick 1 or 2 things at a time that we like to do. And then anybody we can find that likes to do those things, we go out and we do them. And that is how the fire department works. That is how school boards work, right? We have something we like to do. We like to train on this great equipment so that we can feel expert and prepared. When somebody needs help, we're going to be the person who's going to help them, right? This is an actual thing, that we contemplate, right? Probably most people, if you ask them in an abstract way, wouldn't you love it if one day in your life you knew you saved somebody? Most people would answer, yeah, that would be great, But, do you ever stop and think, what if it's not completely about luck? What if it's about joining the rescue squad, getting your EMT? Well, you join the EMT, you don't have to worry if you're going to save someone's life at some point in your life and whether that will feel very rewarding for you. You're going to be saving a lot of people's lives all the time. Like, your whole life is going to be about saving people's lives, because we have systems in place in which you can learn how to do first aid and save people's lives. And they'll give you a little pager and they'll page you. They'll actually let you know when somebody's life is in need of saving, and they will provide you with an excellent vehicle designed for that purpose called an ambulance, and you'll get on it and go to the location of the person whose life needs saving, and you will save that person's life. Right? Now, when you're thinking about something like that, under no circumstances would you let, whether that person opposes abortion, that other person getting on the ambulance with you, would never be a consideration. You're going out to save somebody's life. Of course you're going to share that moment with that person. You're going to bond with that person and have something in common with that person. Not only that, the person who's gasping for breath in that house, you're not going to care that they're anti-abortion either, because you're going to be so caught up with the sheer wonder and necessity and universal good, no matter what they believe in, of saving their life, that you're going to do it. And so with that, we're at 58 minutes. I have to break until next week. You've been listening to This Is Who We Are. My name is Steve Greenfield. See you next week for episode 6. Thanks for watching.